So this new lesson, 2.3, is going to be talking about colors, color basics. We've already discussed colors in some depth in some of the other videos. So let's open up our Adobe Illustrator CC. I'm going to switch my toolbars back to the way I like them. I don't know why that changed. That's weird. And then I'm going to open a new document, Control-N, Command-N on the Mac. And I want a print document. Apparently that's what I have previously set, but I want it set to a landscape, and I will click OK. Now bear in mind, since we're talking in color, before I click OK, that we are working in Cmyk color mode. We've discussed that. If you need a refresher, go back to, I don't remember which one it was, but I do the tour of the interface and discuss that to some depth. So here we are, and I have my blank artboard with no artwork on it. I'm using a Wacom Intuos 3 pen stylus, and I also have a mouse on that, so I can use the mouse or the stylus if I choose, and I may go back and forth just so you know what I'm working with. Again, this lesson is recorded from home because I left my microphone at work. It's going to sound a little different, and I just need to get it recorded today, so bear with me through the technology issues, and hopefully you can get something out of this lesson. So again, first, the color options are in 3 different places. You have how to do your color selection down here, down in the lower left toolbar, and you can change to the default. You can switch, so swap your fill or stroke colors. You can choose to have active either of those by hitting X. I'm sorry, swap was Shift X, and default is just D on the keyboard. Then you can also choose a solid color, a gradient, or no color at all, either in your fill or your stroke. The other place to choose is up here in the toolbar, and there are the color swatches and some other options that you can use. We won't go into them very much here at all. There are also the same options for the stroke color. We're going to skip the stroke line weight and all of those things. The color palette is hiding over here on the right side, and yours may look a little different. I have, if you recall, I have pulled down my spectrum, so I have more color, more precision for the color choices. Now if I have my color choices or the spectrum down like this, we have the same amount of colors to choose from. I just have big hands, and so it's a lot easier for me to get precision. I want exactly that color. You know, I can choose exactly the color I want because I can see them a little differently in more detail here with this pulled out all the way. So that's why it may look different than yours. So here are the color options. Here are the color guides. We will talk about the color guide in a much later lesson. Here we have the swatches, and I will show you these in some detail today. And then we have all the way down here the gradients, and we will work with the gradients today. And then also, I hadn't planned on it, but I think I may touch on transparency and blending mode. I know it's supposed to be later in my lesson, but I just want to touch on that a little bit today because it might be useful. I have a project coming up for my students in class, and if they watch this, it might help them a little bit better understand how to do some things with transparency as they're working on their project. So let's get, let's see, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, let's choose a star. I like stars, they're fun to work with. So here is a big, and remember the star will go from center, so I'm going to go actually with the center of the artboard, drag it out, constrain it, and I will adjust the star points using the Command key on my Mac, Control on a keyboard, and I will bring, and then I'll let go of that and bring that star to right there. If I hold down Alt, it will bring them to perfect triangles, so I think that's what I'll do. And now I have this star. Apparently I have the blue color that you saw me pull out of the color picker in this area. So let's work with some color. Again, I am working in Cmyk color, so cyan, magenta, yellow, and black processed with these percentages of all of these colors to make up the nice light blue that you see there. So I'm using 63.14% cyan, 19.22% magenta, and no yellow and no black. So that's how I get that nice color. You may choose that color or any other color you'd like. One interesting thing to note, while you have your object selected, or even without, as you're working with color, the next object you create is going to have the same settings that you were previously using. So in this case, I have all of these blue stars. Now if I want to make a red star, and I don't want this one selected, I need to deselect. So I'm going to hold down Command on my Mac, Control on a PC, will give me the selection tool, and I will just click anywhere on the artboard or off of the artboard so that I can select nothing. Now I want to change to a red. I can drag over here. I can pick one on the color sliders, and I will get this nice perfect red color and then make a red star. For us and all of our viewers who happen to be in the United States, I am about a week away from Independence Day, so this is a fun little project to just have some stars in red, white, and blue on my screen. And I will put one more here. All right, so we'll stop there. So that is using Cmyk color. I can manipulate, but again, if I have something selected, like you just saw there, it changed from that red to this blue. If I decide that instead of doing this as a Cmyk document, and I want to change my document color to RGB, and now remember, Cmyk is typically print because of the printer process. It processes those four colors, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And RGB would be screen resolution, screen color, because the pixels are illuminated in those three colors, red, green, and blue. So how to do that? I will simply go up to my File menu and down to Document Color Mode, and I can swap between Cmyk color and RGB color. And there I did. It did that. It was as simple as that. You don't even notice the change. However, now that I am working in Cmyk color mode, or excuse me, I was working in Cmyk color mode, so my colors were Cmyk, but now my document, it even says right here, RGB, so I know that it's in RGB color mode. I want to choose the RGB sliders, and those are over here. I've shown you this in a previous lesson, my walkthrough, or my tour around the interface. But if you just click this options, you can choose RGB, Hsb, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, Cmyk, grayscale, and WebSafe RGB. So let's go with RGB, and you see that same blue that I had selected, or a very similar one, the closest approximation of that color from Cmyk into RGB color mode is now the selected color. Okay, so what you'll need to do is bear in mind as you're working with color, I'm going to select this star and I'm going to make a copy of it. And I will teach you the shortcut keys for this in our next lesson 2.4, but just understand I'm holding down Command and Alt or Option, and so Control Alt on a PC, Command Option on a Mac, and I can make a copy while dragging, and so then I just let go of my stylus, and then after I've moved, then I will let go of the shape, and let's look and see if there is a difference in this color. This is the RGB version, and let's go to this one and choose a CMYK color, and it's the same color. So let's zoom in here. And I cannot see a difference. Maybe you can. So anyway, I think that's pretty close. There are some colors that CMYK cannot do, and there are some colors that RGB cannot do. And so just bear in mind you'll get fairly close, but you may not be able to pull it off and have the exact same color. But the option is you can choose whichever color you need, and you should be able to get fairly close with RGB or CMYK. Okay, now the other thing that you'll need to note is the Hsb values. And I don't usually go into these in very much detail because they're a little bit harder to understand. So what you have, for example, is I'll select the large star here in the middle, and that I'm holding down Command or Control, and I'd simply click that star, and now I have it selected. And I can change the hue, and that's what Hsb stands for, hue, saturation, and brightness. So hue means the color on the color spectrum, going from red on one end, through orange, through yellow, through the light greens, through green, through this cyan colors, through the blue, through the violet, all the way to the other end, which again is red. So we've got red on both ends of the color spectrum. Now you'll note that this red is a little more muted than this red, and the reason is because I have the saturation slider. And if you look at, going back to the hue, you have a series of numbers from 0 to 360. And think of a color wheel. When you look at your color wheel, you have a circle, and your color wheel is 360 degrees all the way around. So your red on both ends are going to, it makes sense that they would be at the same place. So when you combine red and blue, you get green. Excuse me. When you combine red and blue, you get violet. Boy, I need to go back to kindergarten. So if you combine blue and yellow, you'll get green. And so as you move around on your color wheel, which is actually represented here in a slider, you'll see the numbers move around between 0 and 360, and just think of it as degrees on the color wheel, and that should help you. In fact, it even has the little degrees mark. So there you go. Now I was talking about the saturation. This one looks more muted, these ones look more vibrant, and that is simply sliding the color slider for the saturation. So I can go all the way down to desaturated, and that will give us a nice gray, because that's all the saturation does. It will desaturate. When you watch a black and white movie, everything is completely desaturated. You have no colors. And then I can turn up the saturation as much as I would like. Then the other slider is brightness, and that is from white or completely illuminated. Think of that, because we're working on screen, and hue, saturation, and brightness are also screen colors, and they're drawn from the RGB, which is displayed in your monitor. So you can go all the way to fully bright, and desaturated will give you a white color, and fully saturated will give you a, whatever hue that you're looking for. And then you have the brightness, which you can turn that all the way down, and what happens when you turn down the brightness in your room? It becomes dark. So you have a completely black room, you have a completely black shape by turning down the brightness to 0, and those two are percentages, so you have a degree and 2 percentages. So when you think of hue, saturation, and brightness color, it's a different way of thinking about the color spectrum. And as you look down here in the color spectrum, you have the same or a similar setup that you had on RGB, and I'll show you that, and Cmyk. So as you can tell, the Cmyk colors are a little more muddy. I mean, you look at the difference here. It went kind of a muddied version of those hues, and go to Hsb, and it's really vibrant. And RGB is going to be the same spectrum as the hue, saturation, and brightness, the Hsb. However, you just choose them a little differently. It's the same process that it illuminates the pixels on your screen. So let me go to a nice blue. That one's pretty wild, but whatever. I'm happy with it. So that is the basics of some of these different colors. Obviously, other options are grayscale. You have black, and it has K here for black, so you have percentage of black that's being filled up in this color. You can go from 0 black, which is white, to 100% black, which is black, obviously. And then you can do web-safe RGB, and that is really interesting. And it goes because not all monitors are going to be able to display the every color. And so you have these bands, you have these striping effects going on within the RGB color spectrum. So basically, as you drag your sliders, you can have only a certain number of colors to choose from, and you'll see the stripes choosing. So way back in the old days of the internet, not too long ago in the real world, but back in the old days of the internet, your computer monitor could only handle displaying of 256 colors. So as you wanted to design something, you had to bear in mind that there were those limitations. Also, the manufacturers of the monitors reserved usually 40 colors that were, unique to the monitor itself. Then you have to have, so 256 minus 40 is 216. So this came about as a way to create the 216 colors that you will see on a computer monitor in the old days of the web. Now, nowadays you've got monitors that will show more than 16 million colors, and so this is really not as important unless you happen to be working on a design that is using those web color safes, or those web safe colors, which again on the menu is web safe RGB, and because it's derived from the red, green, and blue sliders, and it has these weird values that go from 0 through 99, and then AA through FF. And basically it's hexadecimal, so you have excuse me, 256 or 216, depending on which version it is. And so you'll see these bandings. And so as I pick this color, it doesn't matter where I happen to be, it's going to only choose this color unless I cross into that border. And you can see the sliders move as you go across the color spectrum. However, it's not as robust. You don't have as many choices to choose from as you would if you were using straight RGB. Now, the other reason this is important, let's say you're working on something that somebody wants to use in a website, and I want this color blue, and I want my links and my background color and all of my HTML. I'm going to talk about coding a little bit. So all of my colors that are coded into the document itself, the web document, they are going to use these values that you'll see here. And it's a combination of these three values on the sliders. So you'll see 00 in this case, 99, and FF. And 00 means the red slider is completely off. It's on the black side. FF means the blue, excuse me, is fully illuminated. And the green is somewhere between halfway and 60% of being full power. So it comes up and you just tack these numbers together. The first one corresponds to the R, so 00, 99 for the green, and FF for the blue. Now, if you've been using RGB color, you'll notice that their same hexadecimal value, is what it's called, is also in your RGB slider. So the color stayed the same, this hexadecimal value stayed the same, but now I have the options of 0 to 255. So I have way more color choices in my sliders and way more color choices in my spectrum down here. But the color remains the same, and so I can come in here and I can choose the same color that I have in these light blue stars. And I'll do that with the color picker, the eyedropper tool. And you can see now that it's changed to these values on the slider and this value in the hexadecimal. Now, if you look at the Cmyk, you don't see that color value just because it's not processed and translated from these values, so it doesn't really make any sense. However, Adobe is smart enough, or Illustrator is smart enough, that it keeps that value in here. All you need to do, if you need to find and match a color to, you give to your web developer and say, okay, make all of the text, this same light blue color, you can give him that or her that value, and now the website will match what you're designing on your artwork. So that's a little bit about the WebSafe color and a little bit about these color pickers and the color modes and color options. So you saw me pick up a color using the eyedropper tool. Let me go back to the selection tool and I will click, let's get this out of the way, this color palette. So I can select a color or an object, for example this blue star here, and now I want this blue star to be the red color because it's too close to this other blue star. I don't want it to be the same color as the blue star. I don't want it the same color as this light blue star. I want it to be the red color. So how do I do that? Well, that is the eyedropper tool. And you think of what an eyedropper does when you are picking fluids. Say you're going to give your child medicine, or you need to precisely pull out 2 tablespoons or whatever it happens to be from something in back in your chemistry class or something like that. You would go grab your eyedropper. And so the eyedropper works similar to that, but you're only picking color. Well, I say that, but I'll show you a difference. or a distinction in there. So the eyedropper tool is with I for eyedropper, and I will click that. And as you see, well, down here it's on the toolbar if you need to find it. I don't use those things, you know that. So as you see, I've got this little eyedropper that I can just, click somewhere. So if I want to select this blue color, I'll just click that blue color. And now the object I had selected matches the fill and stroke of the new shape that I selected. So let's go with the red because that's what I really wanted. And now it's red just like that. Alright, so as we look at the options by double clicking the eyedropper tool, you can see it has some different options. The eyedropper picks up the appearance, and that is all of the transparency, fill, color, transparency, overprint, all of these things here. And also the text of the character style and the paragraph style. And then it can apply all of those options or any number of unchecked. I mean, you can check and uncheck these as you go. And then the other thing that you may notice right here first is the raster sample size. And that is if you have a raster graphic, so a photo of somebody's face or a truck or car, any sort of icon that you bring into Illustrator as a raster graphics. And that can choose a point sample right from the point where you press down the eyedropper tool, either with your cursor, or with your stylus, or with your left button on your mouse, or it'll do a 3x3 average or a 5x5 point average and get you the nice a nice rough estimate of what that color is. So let's leave that one alone for now because we don't have any raster graphics. As we talk about raster graphics, we may cover this. But right now, just know that the eyedropper tool will pull from one object that you have on your artboard or anywhere on your display, your desktop, and apply the attributes of that object to one that you have selected first. So this star right here is too close to this red star, so I want to add the blue color that I have here, this darker blue, to this red star. So I will first select the star, and then I will come over to the object I want to copy from and simply click, and now it is also that blue color. I also want to show you some other things that you can do with the eyedropper tool. So let me set this up quickly by changing the stroke and some other attributes to some of these objects, and I'll do that in a sped up mode here, so bear with me. Okay, so I have a big collage of different strokes and fills and effects. I have or not effects, but I have a gradient on this object. This one has a dotted or dashed line. This one has no fill. This one has a black and it's inverted from most of these other ones. So anyway, I've got a bunch of shapes I can work with. So working with the eyedropper tool, you're going to get used to the shortcut key for part of the finger dance. Again, that we'll talk about in the next lesson, 2.4. But you'll get used to it right now as you practice doing this. Holding down Command or Control whenever you want to select an object. So for example, if I want to select this red star over here in the corner, I will hold down Command and click it, and I still have my eyedropper tool selected, and I can pick any of these objects, and as you see, it applies both the stroke and the fill no matter which object I select, even if it has no stroke, or excuse a stroke but no fill, it's going to just pick that up, and there we have all of our your options with that tool. So that is the eyedropper tool. Now what we will look at, as you can see, I have some solid colors, I have some no fill objects, and I have some gradients. So let's work with gradients. As you can see, if you watched closely with that sped up part of the tutorial, you can add a gradient to a fill. And let's focus on, whoops, I didn't want to do that, so Control Z, Command Z will undo. I want to select this red star here with the white stroke on it, and I want to come over to my gradient options. Now, in order to make the fill, which is what I have active, as you look down here, if I want to make that, actually it's also here. It shows me which one is active. I can switch back and forth between them there, or over here, or up in my color palette. Anyway, or I can just switch back and forth again by hitting X on my keyboard. So I want to change this red fill from a solid red to a gradient of red. And how to do that, I can choose a gradient from this drop down, and I don't see one that I like, so I can just leave it with the black and white. And then as I choose the gradient, all I need to do is just select it there. Let me undo that. I could also have chosen way down here in the lower left corner my gradient fill option, or selected that by hitting the greater than symbol on my keyboard. Remember, greater for gradient, greater than for gradient. That was part of our tools review memorization techniques. So I will do that, greater than, to get the gradient, and the gradient that it places is whichever was either the last gradient I've used on the document or in my settings, or it is the default, and in this case it is the default, which is also the last one I've used. So how can we modify the gradient? As you see, I have a type selector here. I can change the type from a linear, which means one straight direction, either vertical, horizontal, or along a line, and we'll play with the gradient tool to figure that out, or the radial tool, and the radial means inside to out, and that's what that means. You can change the angle either in linear. With linear, you change the angle and it obviously will adjust to that angle, starting in this corner and 45° up to this corner. So I could change it there. I could use any of these preset angle numbers, and they're kind of helpful. I can, when I change to a radial, those really don't help me very much because I'm just going from the center to the outside, and it doesn't matter which angle I use for that, it's going to be the same. I can change my scale, so change the scale from 100% to 0%, and it's the aspect ratio. So basically that is vertical to horizontal, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And then you can reverse the gradient. So now instead of starting with white and going to black, it's going to start with black and go to white. So that is an example of switching those back and forth. And then the other interesting thing you can do with the gradient is using the gradient slider. So you have this little kind of a marker that symbolizes the first color, and this one symbolizes the second color, And this one symbolizes where along the slider the transition is. So, for example, if I take this, and there's three things to note here: your opacity, and your location, and the color. So I can move this along the slider, and you see what happens to the location. And the effect is now there is a lot more white at the center of that object than there is the black. And I can move either one of them back and forth across the slider. And you saw the location. I can choose a set point, and so I can move it so it's just a little bit of the gradient and then it goes quickly to the black. I can make it so that there's no gradient at all if they're both at that point. And then I can change where that transition location is. I can move it so it's a lot firm or a lot closer to the white. I can move it a lot closer to where the black is. So just as you work with the gradient tool, play around with it and figure out what works best for the look you're going for. And then I'll show you some other things you can do with it. You can take your gradient and you can choose one of these colors. And so, for example, I'll start with this white color, and I'll put another white color really close to the, actually I'll put another color which gives me one more slider. So now, because I have three colors, I have two sliders, or two transition points, and I can move that third gradient color, or I can move that slider color and make a really dramatic kind of effect to it. I can reset them. I can click it and click this little trash can, and so this is the stop, the color stop, and I will delete that color stop. Or I can, let's pick that one back up, and whoops, now I have two. Alright, so I can double click the color and choose one of my colors from my swatches, or I can grab a color from my color spectrum or my sliders. And so now my gradient goes from white to blue to black. So you can see if I start adding different colors in here and double click it to get a different color, I can kind of get rainbow effects going on. So you can really go crazy with your with your gradients and have some really awesome or interesting or creative or whatever adjective you want to use. You can come up with some really interesting gradient designs and colors. So now I have a red, green, and blue. So I've got this RGB black and white color gradient. And the other thing you can do is is you can save your gradient as a slider, or you can, go back to the linear. Ooh, I like that. That looks really nice. So if I come up with a gradient that I like a whole lot, then I'll come to my swatches. I can click to make a new swatch, and it will take whatever the active color is. So in this case, it's my red, green, and blue with white and black gradient that I've just created. And I'll click New Swatch, and I'll call it RGB Gradient. And there you see it, right there, next to all of my swatches. And then you can save swatches, and then when you are in a different document or something like that, all you have to do is pull out that swatch and away you go. Alright, so that is saving a gradient to your swatch. Obviously, if you have a different color, some color that you would like to use, you can also save that to your swatch. So, for example, I will select this blue star here with the black fill and make sure that my blue is the active, my fill is the active color. And just like those other panels that I showed you, if I want to switch, I can switch back and forth by hitting X, or come all the way down here and use the active and select it, or I can go onto my swatch panel that I was and click it to select, but X is so much easier for me because I'm a finger dancer, so there you go. So I can select that fill and create a new swatch, and I can call it whatever I would like and make sure that it knows that it's a process color or a spot color. We'll talk about spot colors some other time. We've touched on them a little bit, but the swatch name now is RGB 81 167 blue 221 whatever. I can call it my cool blue if I want. Oops. I can call it whatever name I would like, and it knows it's in RGB. It knows I can choose Hsb or Cmyk or lab. I'm not going to talk about lab color right now. Or I can make it a global color, which means all the documents that I open from this point on will have that color in it as a global color. So I'm going to do that and click OK. The other thing I can do with a color that I would like to save for either myself or others to use is put it in the library. So I have Creative Cloud 2015, and I would like to add my color, and you just click on the Creative Cloud icon down here and go to Libraries if you don't have that selected. So I have in here some things that I'm using. One is a Pantone spot color, and also I can look here and I can do add graphic, which will add that star. I can do add font or character style. I don't have any character styles selected right now. Or I could do the fill color or the stroke color. So if my fill color is a really awesome blue color that I want forever, and I want to put it on this device and any other device that I have connected to my account on the Creative Cloud, I will just click that, and now I have that blue color right there, and it's called My Cool Blue, just like I named it. However, as I'm working with my libraries here, I've got My Stuff library, which I've shown in a in-class setting, and how to add things to it. But if I want to add this gradient that I've just created, let's select it with the selection tool. That's V on the keyboard. And so I select that. You'll see something interesting here. I have lost the ability to add the gradient color to my colors. Now, why is that? I think it has to do with the fact that it's a gradient, so it's a combination of colors. And I may not be in a situation where I want to add this gradient to something, and so if I start filling up my library with colors rather than these swatches, I think it might be confused. However, I have the swatch right here enabled. I double click. I can't make it a global gradient. That's fine, whatever. So how do I, if you can tell me, anybody, how do I add that to my library? And you'd think that it would be down here on the go to, libraries panel, but I don't have that option. So I guess what I would have to do if I want those colors is to click on each one of them, save it as a swatch, and go through the process that way. I guess there must be a better way, maybe I'm just missing it, to add the color, the gradient, obviously I could drag the artwork and just use the artwork as a graphic, you know, in my library. That's one possibility. But then if I want to use that artwork without the star shape, then, you know, I'm committed to that. But whatever, I'm not real torn up about it, but it's just an interesting thing. I'm concerned about why I can't use a gradient in my library. So anyway, if you happen to know something that I'm missing, go ahead and let me know, and I'll look for you in the next video.